outstretched hand.
Hi, this is Max. Welcome to episode 11 of my quest to understand, learn more about, uncover how people in the world, especially educators and folks who work to make sure that we're building a better world for children, think about school belonging, because school is a place where most kids spend most of their waking time. So today's guest is David Ryan Barcega Castro-Harris. He's the founder of Amplify RJ, and he's a restorative justice practitioner based in Los Angeles. His work, as you'll hear, is focused around relationships. He has a deeply relational philosophy, and he encourages us to avoid sort of quick fix or nostalgic practices that create overly punitive cultures of fear. His work is grounded in collectivism, intentional anti-racism philosophy and actions, and that relational piece around interconnection. David holds a master's degree in social justice from Loyola University in Chicago. His work is about supporting schools and communities broadly to move past compliance and build lasting cultures of care and accountability. So I was really excited for this conversation. A lot of the times when I talk to people, they understand the philosophy, but don't always have the actions or the ideas on how to change the system at large. So happy to learn from David and have him contribute to this conversation about what is school belonging. So thanks for listening. Please share this, comment, and reach out if you'd like to talk. But from your perspective, from your background, from your own experiences as a student, and knowing that you have your own restorative justice framework, how do you distinguish between belonging versus fitting in or complying with rules? How do you tend to make sense of that when you're guiding or supporting educators?
When I think about the context of a school and what belonging means or what restorative culture means, a couple of things come to mind. First, that when we think about schools as they exist for most of us, for what most of us experienced growing up and working in, they function as childcare centers while adults work, right? And so at minimum, are the kids safe while they're there, right? Are they safe from getting physically hurt, hopefully emotionally hurt as well? But then what else are we doing while they're there? When I think about my background in restorative justice, not just as a way to navigate conflict and harm with relationship repair at the center, it is also about what are we restoring back to? What is the relationship? What is the healthy relationship? And so when I think about belonging in a community, I think about our ancestors. Go back however far you need to go to when our ancestors, wherever they lived, were in groups of 50 people, and you belong to that community. You had responsibilities to that community because of your survival. If one of you isn't working, something really important isn't getting done. And so belonging is both, I'm taking care of people, I have responsibilities, and people are taking care of me. And I do think that functions in a lot of ways within the context of schools as we constructed them, right? There are contractual obligations for teachers to be paid, right? Administrators to be paid. Tax dollars go to provide the service, at least in public schools. Tuition dollars go in independent school settings. And, you know, there's an agreement, childcare, and hopefully they learn something, right? Hopefully that is around not just like math, reading, and science and all that, but how to be a human in relationship with others. But I think it's really important to start with that framework of we are responsible for each other, and not just in a contractual way, but we belong to each other because, you know, I take care of you, you take care of me. There are lots of words from indigenous cultures that get to that idea when we say like in la quech, it's a Mayan phrase, I am another you, you are another me, or Ubuntu, like I am because we are, or Metakuyasan, we are all relatives, Kapwa, the inner connection, like all beings are interconnected. And so when you think about what is helpful for you helps me, and what harms you harms me as well, that is the foundation of we belong to each other, right? So let's do things that are beneficial. And I think there are a lot of systems and structures that have been constructed post-industrial, post-capitalist, post-colonial, post-imperial that get in the way of all of that. And I don't know how much our conversations get into those things, but just from a conceptual foundation, belonging is about those responsibilities that we have to each other, and that others have to us.
So I love all of that, and I love the sentiment of both. We have a social contract. There's a contract here that our survival depends on, or our wellness depends on. And I hear you talking about the I am you and you are me. We're made of the same things. We come from the earth and we shall return to the earth. But one thing that I grapple with a lot as a parent, as a citizen, as an educator, is in the best scenarios, we might demystify that for children. We might be really intentional as adults about that. And then still in the air is, oh, by August 28th, we'll have given our beginning of year assessments. And by September 6th, we will have children in tiered, leveled, small groups. And so both watch those two ways of talking happening sometimes in the very same meeting, maybe not the same breath, but in the same meeting. And then our students, I always use this example of like, we might have the best community building circle ever, and everyone feels so good. And then we go to our high, medium, and low groups. And so how do you both conceive of those really different realities? And how do you coach and support adults to hold on to both of those at the same time? Or is it we all should be standing up and burning standardized tests and textbook companies to the ground at this point? Like,
sure, that. And I can't claim to come from like the instructional background. Like I come from doing this work from criminal legal spaces, community spaces, and then translating that work into different spaces, including schools, workplaces, et cetera. Right, wherever people are in relationship, there's going to be conflict, and we repair and we build that culture. And I think there is, of course, the burn it down and create something new. And on a micro level, that works. There are micro schools. There's lots of different versions of what people are doing. Unschooling, schooling from home. And that is not accessible to the vast majority of people. And if you can do that, and that works for you and your family, great, by all means. But for those of us who are stuck in this social contract, there has to be some acknowledgement of the limitations. And one, helping teachers understand what those limitations are, because I don't think anybody goes into education saying like, I'm so excited on August 28th to have my kids tiered out and see them progress to the next level. Nobody goes into education thinking that. And not everybody who goes into education has that consciousness of like, that's what the system is. People eventually learn that over time, but we have to be honest about what the limitations of the systems that we're working in are. And then from a principled personal stance or a principled, this is what my school community or my school leader is saying that we're going to do, work from there. An example is I was working with a school. This was in the second year that I was working with them. The first year was more about, teacher capacity building, understanding common language and internal practices. The second year was when we were starting to implement some of those things into the classroom. I'm not someone who says like, oh, let's do community circles wholesale. I don't think everyone is capable of doing that well. As an aside, like circles come from a very specific tradition for me. And just because you're sitting in a circle, maybe even passing a talking piece, doesn't make it a talking circle or a peacemaking circle in traditional settings that have like specific lineages. But we did talk about what does it mean to have soft starts to the day or gentle starts to the day, rituals of connection, right? That can look like circles, but that looks like other things where we are inviting students into having a softer landing into the space from the chaos of the playground before or whatever they came from for the last 18 hours that you didn't see them from the time they left their classroom to whatever they experienced in their neighborhoods or at home. And what is it that we're going to drop them into right before we get into instruction, right?
Mhm.
So it can look like that. What are the ways that we're checking in on the, you know, spiritual, physical, mental, emotional, not necessarily every day, but when you have an awareness of how what your student's baseline is, and when things are off, you're a lot more able to mitigate problems before they become full-blown crises. But you have to build in those structures so you're making sure that you can attend to those relationships. And so just on a practical level, you know, soft start, gentle start, what are those rituals of connection? That in and of itself is restorative, and you know, that is proactively building and strengthening relationships rooted in equity and trust, so you have something to repair or restore back to when something inevitably goes wrong, or when harm does occur, or when agreements aren't being upheld, because it's a lot easier when you have that level of relationship. So there is this practical level of, these are the time limitations, these are the instructional hours, these are this is when music class is happening, and like we can't move that around because, you know, that music teacher has to go from here to here, and PE happens at this time, and this time. We only have maybe 47 minutes if you're in a middle school, high school setting. Just understand your limitations and work within that to what your either mandate from on high is, or like what your mandate from your soul as a person who is deciding to spend the vast majority of their waking hours caring for children.
But your background in the justice system is, I'm inferring, is as a human being. Like this is also work that we want replicated when you leave the workplace. Like we want children to be able to carry this outside. That's sort of my next question is, I'm sure you've seen this in schools, but also your experience in the criminal justice system or the justice system, of the loop of being in just generally punitive systems anyway. In schools, it's detention, suspensions, isolation, which we know can replicate itself outside of schools. So I don't know how to phrase this, but I am wondering from your perspective how we get back to some baseline for minds and bodies who are already in that cycle of punishment, over discipline, overly scrutinized. Like we're not all entering schools with a certain sense of freedom. Like,
yeah. Well, and let's talk about some of the words, as you said. Discipline, right? You're an educated, you're a learned person. What does discipline mean?
Well, you know, whenever I was asked this as like a teacher, when I was trying to get jobs, I had what I thought was a good answer, was like that I thought was a social justice answer, and you tell me how it lands now. I would always say, like, discipline is what we do all of the time to build practices and structures that help us sort of buy in, or like take up whatever has been put down for learning. But then as a school principal, I think I had it sort of like the class management discipline of like, it is a method to control. I think I shifted and kind of went to the other side as a principal when I was like, we got 600 kids here. We got to make sure that there's a sort of control piece. So tell me what you hear when I say that.
And so I heard you operationalize the word, but what does the word discipline mean? Just like on its face.
What I would say is, I'll just say as a human being, discipline, like a practice, like it's a practice of being. Like discipline is a practice of being. I am so trying not to say of control.
Sure.
But
so just when we go to, you know, Latin roots of the word discipline, like, is to learn, like to teach, right? The disciples of Christ, right? The people who followed learned from Christ. And the way that word specifically got co-opted into behavior control was through, you know, religious institutions saying like, I am going to discipline myself in self-flagellating ways to like get rid of my sinful behaviors. And that's how we like now understand it in a common practice. And so when you talk about like, how do we come into a space where there are so many punitive, control-based things, that messages that we get from society, the way that we've been socialized, understanding that is so crucial. Discipline is just about teaching and learning. Discipline of yoga, discipline of piano, discipline of math, discipline of, whatever. Like, what is it that you're following? What are you learning? And so discipline, learning can be punitive. Discipline can be permissive, right? What is somebody learning if you're letting things slide? Oh, I can get away with this. This isn't important. Discipline, when you're punitive and controlling and restrictive, is, oh, let me avoid doing that, or let me be sneaky about how I do that so I'm not getting caught and not getting punished. So just naming that we are socialized in the United States, just to say for those of us who are predominantly listening here, that is so ingrained in the way that our country was constructed on Judeo-Christian values, and we don't need to get into like penal substitutionary atonement. I did have some like theological training, not a part of my life anymore, but that's how I got there. That is just so ingrained in the way that we think about controlling people's behavior, because we have this belief that like we are bad or people are bad and their behavior needs to be controlled. And when I think about a restorative worldview, there are 7 core principles of restorative justice that a woman named Kay Pranis and Carolyn Boyce Watson put together. They are not like capital T truth, but have been taken from a lot of different wisdom traditions. And the first one is that at their core, humans are good, wise, and powerful. And then they need to be supported and put in environments that allow them to practice those things. And when we put people in restrictive, controlling environments, they're going to adapt to that because we are reflections of what we practice. And so as we have schools as constructed, with all of the socialization that we've had from our own schooling, from our own upbringing, religious or not, what we've heard from parents, what we've heard from other jobs, what we've heard from media, what we've absorbed from politics and how the world operates, it makes sense that we come in with this mindset of control, because it makes things like operational and easier and produces like really good factory workers who can like do a job. But that is not necessarily what humans were built to be. And that's the acknowledgement of the limitations that we're working under and what we're willing to extend ourselves to go to. Because I think a lot of the times I've been discouraged about doing restorative justice work within the context of schools is I haven't necessarily seen like whole school implementation last in meaningful ways past the principal's leadership. Because in schools, time and resources, what teachers and students are incentivized to do are dictated both by, the district on some level, state standards, but by the school leader. And when you're not going to continue to invest in setting aside that time for example, like those soft starts, for example, restorative conversations in the hallways where teachers have coverage to be able to step out and do that, or longer restorative conferences or circles where there's adequate staff to support the students in that process and adequate staff to support the students who are like still in the classroom. Without the investment in those systems and structures, we're not going to get very far.
I appreciate that if there's not ongoing investment, and investment meaning time, modeling, practicing, resources for sure, space, cover, whatever those things are, that we end up right back with the same things that we've complained about. My next question, which was, I think, connection before correction phrase that has made its way all over the place. And I think, I don't know if you have a pat way to explain it, but like, how do you support people in that, even if they believe that some of the behaviors they've seen are antisocial, harmful? Like, how do you support adults with authority in prioritizing connection?
Yeah. Can you name the behaviors that you think you're talking about when you say that are like awful and antisocial?
My example as a school leader was I had a reading specialist, so someone whose role was to make sure she was supporting children who were having trouble accessing a reading curriculum. And I remember watching her, a white woman, literally walk over a Black child who was overwhelmed. So what my teachers would say was the student was having a meltdown, and this teacher was so sick and tired and frustrated with her, she wanted nothing to do with her, that I watched her walk over her and totally dismiss her. So I was like, my mind is turning of what you are seeing so abhorrent to you that in the outside world, you wouldn't help this child. I've seen people who say, get this child out of my classroom they're sleeping. So I think it's more like when that adult is communicating to you like, nope, I don't have any ability from this heart to connect to that heart.
Yeah, and I think that is valid, and I think it was also really important that I had you name like the specific behaviors, because a lot of times when we're labeling or putting judgments on behaviors, those judgments don't actually mean anything, right? This kid was being so disrespectful. What was he doing? He was sleeping, right? This kid was being so disrespectful. He was running around the classroom, throwing shit on the ground. Hey, I see where you're coming from. Like, what is also true is that is a young person or just a person in a body who does not have the skills to regulate and does not feel safe in your environment to do that. And so whether or not you believe that like that child is the spawn of Satan, that person is still a person with needs. And the logical conclusion of throwing out everybody who does something that offends you is an empty classroom, an empty workplace. In other spaces, you know, I say the logical conclusion of like an eye for an eye, right, is like, you know, they say the whole world blind, but like, hey, if somebody does something bad, shoot them in the head, be done with it, right? And so like we can't lean into that disposability. But what I will say for the reading specialist who is overwhelmed, right? That person is a person too with needs and an overtaxed nervous system, working in a school environment where they might not have all the support that they needed. Maybe they just had a really bad day before coming into the space. And like everyone is good, wise, and powerful at the core. And there's so many things that get in the way of us being in good relationship with each other or feeling safe in our environments. Because what would it have been like for that person, instead of like walking over that student and being dismissive, to be able to say to another adult in the building, like, I'm having a really hard time. I need to take a break. Can you go be with that student? That person probably didn't exist at that school, right? Because of funding, right? We just don't have enough bodies to make sure something that like that happens. And so what is she going to do? Is she going to grit her teeth and like get through that interaction? Maybe. That kid is going to sense that. Right. And while that's not ideal, that's what happens so often for so many people. And so like I do have like a lot of empathy for people who struggle. People are overwhelmed by the conditions that they're put in and don't have outlets. They might not, as people, have identified their own needs and what they need to do to proactively get in that place. They might not have the material resources or the material time and support to make sure that that happens. And so when I think about like the structural ways of community care, it's like, yeah, you're responsible for your reactions to some extent and taking care of yourself to some extent, but what are the conditions that we're setting you up to succeed and or fail in? Because if the bar is here for adult behavior, but the support is here, it's the same thing that we're setting up kids for, where we have this expectation, but they don't have the support, and everybody gets left feeling some level of shame, unsupported, resentment, and, you know, adult acting out might look like petty passive aggressive or maybe aggressive comments while a student is flipping desks. But at the core, it's the same thing, unmet needs and people trying to get those needs met in ways that are actively causing either disruption or more conflict and harm to others.
I agree that we're all people doing community-based work, and I'm throwing schools in there, are all part of institutions that have not been fully supported. The promise has not been fulfilled, but I am trying to listen for, and maybe my mind is a little bit stuck in that school situation. The adult has a certain type of freedom that the child doesn't. Has a certain type of background, knowledge, understanding, training. And I hear you that, and I could be that reading teacher too, right? I've lost my shit in very inappropriate ways when I feel totally drained. So, but I have a certain type of agency because our country or our world prioritizes adults. You know, like it gives more freedoms to adults than to children, because, you know, this is the only place a child can be during waking hours. Otherwise, if they're too present, too visible in public, they will truly get thrown back into a school or into DCFS, into childcare. You know, like they are police to be in school. So when you're doing that work, how do you have conversations about sort of positionality, like have people own that they are entering with different levels of societal power, or
There are a couple of different ways, and there's like a whole workshop to be done about like intersectional identity and wheel of power and privilege, where you are understanding like where you sit. And I think not a lot of people can name adultism. And so that might be a helpful place to start. That might not always be the entryway for people, because like I think one of the things that I am struggling with as like still a relatively young person who still holds on to what 24, 26-year-old me believed about like ideals, and then like trying to understand like what we can practically get done or what we can practically get people to do, because we're not necessarily going to change hearts and minds, but we can put in these structures so they do these things. Maybe they're gritting their teeth, maybe they're doing it half-heartedly, but I can't get you to believe that your opinion is equally as valid as a child's. I can't get you to believe that your opinion and your needs are equally as valid as a child's. I can't get you to believe that. When I talk to teachers about creating classroom agreements, right? It's not you're saying like you're giving all of your will over to the students and like whatever it is that they want is what we'll do. Like, no, I have a role here. And like, that's what we're talking about, like explaining the limitations. Like I have a role here to teach, to keep you guys safe. And these are some of the things that I need in order to help me to be able to do that. What are some of the things that you need from me? What are some of the things that you need from each other? And what can we agree to make sure that we can have a fun school year as possible, right? Yeah. And that's different than saying, these are the school values that are up on the wall. This is the school handbook. These are Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so's rules for the classroom. If you're not on board, you can make your way down to Principal Max's office, right? Or I'll see you after school, or I'll call your mom. Right? And I'm not saying that, and I'm also not saying that any of those interventions are bad in and of themselves. We should communicate with parents. Sometimes we do need intervention from other folks. Sometimes we do need time and space away from people, right? But the attitude that you come to it with is also important. I think there is something about in that process of creating agreements where you're already instilling that like, hey, you're a part of a community. This is what we're responsible for. And like all the 30 other people, hopefully 24, 30 upwards of, right? All these other students are relying on you to have a positive experience here, just like you're relying on them, right? And that's from don't use the pencil sharpener when the teacher's talking, to like don't steal your friend's snacks, to don't hit each other with pencils, right? Like all these interactions that we're not necessarily on that level, like writing every possible infraction down, but what are the ways that we're being kind to each other? What are the ways that we're being respectful? What are the ways that we're taking care of each other?
I want to ask you sort of the magic wand question. The magic wand of, we understand human beings are complicated and stuff happens, misunderstandings. But as a person raising kids, you're an educator, as a restorative justice practitioner, leader, facilitator, what is sort of your dream for belonging or justice as a practice? Like, we never arrive, but how do you know when you walk into a space and the conditions are there for a healthy level of communication, trust to be occurring?
Yeah, on some level, there are like really superficial things that like, did someone say hi to me when I walked into a space? Was food provided, or is food accessible? Right? That says a lot about how a space cares about its people, because like, let's be real, so much of the world's problems would be taken care of if like people weren't hangry, right? Or anxious, or some level of that. But even when I come into professional development settings, and the schools that feed their staff versus the schools that don't, like there's a difference there about like how you decide that you're demonstrating care. And so like, is there food available? Are people being greeted? Are huge. Like they seem superficial, but they're huge. Are there moments where people are actively checking in on each other, not just waiting for crises, like proactively putting in those systems and structures to be able to identify issues, and also to be able to just build relationships and say like, hey, I remembered that you had a baseball game this weekend. How did it go? Great. Awesome. High five. That is such a like connecting moment between a student and adult, student and an adult. Also between adults, right? Hey, like I remember you had your softball league going. How did that game go? Right? Does wonders for, collegiality in those spaces, and just gives you a foundation of, hey, this person is a person. And whenever I have beef with them, because it's going to happen, they're a person that I can go to be able to address it. And then, so how are we actively saying the things directly to people instead of triangulating, instead of waiting till it boils over and we explode, until just grinning and bearing it until like you decide that you can't take it anymore and leave, right? So the ways that you demonstrate care, the ways that you address conflict directly play an important role. Those are some signifiers.
Yeah, and there sometimes I see now in norms when I work with schools is they'll put down be human, but what I hear you saying of like the eating, the hello, I recognize you, we prepare food, nourishment, that some of that is like we are in this space as complex beings is what I hear you saying. We need to find ways to connect with one another. And then maybe
I think like I'm not saying that like every adult who works in schools should show up as their full selves. I think it's appropriate for people to have the boundaries that they're comfortable with. And as a school leader, as somebody who is actively contributing to school culture as an adult in the building, right? What is the environment that you want to be a part of? Like, what are the things, what are the ways that you want to take care of other people? What are the ways that you want people to take care of you? So it's as specific as, say hi and share food. But I do want to make sure that people are not hearing my work is my everything. And so I'm going to give it all there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I'm definitely learning a whole lot. I'm taking some notes over here. But I want to thank you. Anything that folks can look up, will you share that?
AmplifyRJ.com is the easiest for everything. Resources, lots of things. And if you need specific support on things having to do with conflict, culture, holla at your boy.
Thank you so much. It's great getting to know you. A social media site brought us together, so social media can't be all bad. But I was really excited to learn about you and your work.
Appreciate it, Max. Have a great one.
An outstretched hand, smiling eyes, comfort.